All right, so today we have something a little bit different, but also very exciting, and I'm really excited. See how many times I can say excited to bring a new segment, if you will, to the Body Nerd Show, where we get to ask Dr. Sarah Court all the questions that we have about movement and fitness and life and pain, and she will make us smarter and wiser. So thank you, Sarah, for being here today. You're the bomb. I hope to suck up some of your wisdom through the computer and through the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And also, I'm going to just hire you to be my hype man.
Oh,
And
yeah,
just
yeah,
walk every time I walk into a room,
yeah.
Alex comes first and just says all this stuff.
Get ready. That would be my life's greatest honor to be your hype
Oh,
woman.
God.
Well, we have already chatted on a previous episode about things you like to get nerdy about. But for people who have just like dropped in on this episode and they're like, where am I? What's going on? What do you like to get nerdy
Well, my answer last time still sort of stands, which was carbs.
about?
But still, there's so much to discover about
So much.
variety of preparation. But you know, I what I'm sort of it always kind of depends. And one of the things that at the moment that I'm sort of seeing the most of is figuring out the way that I like work with patients and have them sort of explain to me what's going on with their body and kind of trying to do like a CSI, detective thing on what's going on with them. I'm actually doing more of it on my own body than I
Mm.
maybe ordinarily would. Like, why is my left thigh, front of my leg, kind of giving me an issue? What did I do? You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. So really, sort of, it's always easy, I think, especially if you're in the movement business, to take the stuff that you know and apply it outwards towards other people, and always be thinking about, like, I'll wake up sometimes, be like, oh, I wonder if I tried this with this patient, if that would make a difference. It's always sort of running in the back of your head. And I tend to, like, like all good doctors, completely ignore my own body, pretend like not everything's fine all the time, always.
Great.
I'm starting to try to do a little bit more of that for myself. So I guess I'm nerding out on self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah, whole
Which
new world.
actually I think would be super interesting to debunk our first fitness myth, which actually we hadn't talked about and I hadn't written down, but then you mentioned that and then I remembered about having to do stuff on like exactly the same from side to side. So
Yes.
would you share a little bit too of this like self-care exploration experimentation that you've been doing over the last couple months?
Yeah. So I have had a few different surgeries on my right hip, including the most recent one, which was 7 or so years ago, was a hip replacement. And I'm essentially totally functional. Both of my legs work. I can do all the stuff that I want to do. But I recently discovered that I cannot do like a single leg, not even a pistol squat, just like a single leg sit down to a chair and back up again on the right side, the surgery side. And I can do it on the left. And I was like, well, again, this doesn't come up in my daily life very much. I'm not trying to sit down in a chair with one leg, on the regular. But, and this is what I talk about a lot with patients, nobody's perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah.
But what we want to look at is if there's some movement or some area in your body, or if it's a range of motion or strength or whatever, where it's vastly different side to side. So in this case, I can do the thing on one side and I 100% fail on the other side. That's something to look at. Not that, again, they're never going to be identical because we're not robots, but you want the differences to be minimized, because that's how you then prevent potential future injury because of such a huge difference.
Hmm.
So I've been working on trying to get that single leg sit to chair and back up again on the right side, and it's getting better. But I'm discovering along the way all these other things are cropping up in other parts of my body. And at first I was like, oh, this can't possibly be related. And then I was like, don't be an idiot. Of course it's related. What has changed? This has changed. So,
Yeah.
there's some stuff going on now with my left leg because of like having to hold it up while I'm doing this single leg squat on the other side. And it has never really done it that much. And it's not psyched about it. So there's like sort of this cascade. And that's, I think, what I'm referring to when I'm talking about really paying attention in your own body to, we understand everything is connected. So I have to assume that it's related to that because nothing else has changed. So it's that
Right.
kind of like detective drilling down, paying attention, and linking things together, and then figuring out what to do about it. But I have a whole the way that I've been working to get better at that single leg squat on the right side is a whole series of exercises that I do not do on the left side because I don't need to, because I can
Right.
already do it on that left side. So, you know, especially in the yoga world, we're very much taught as yoga teachers, you do the same thing on the left as you do
Mhm.
on the right, because, otherwise you're going to become imbalanced, which
Like,
is
I already started imbalanced. I
yeah,
didn't
exactly.
know.
Like if you were perfectly symmetrical to begin with, fine. But if you're not, it's not doing anything to affect that.
Right.
So perhaps not in a vinyasa yoga class would you do this, but you yourself in your own workout, or if you're a teacher and you're working with a private client, or you could always, you could do it in a class where you set it up as an experiment. Like, hey, everybody, try this on this side, try this on the other side. Are they different? The one that you were worse at, do it some more.
Mhm.
Things like that. So, I do think that's an important thing to start to pay attention to, is that we absolutely do not have to do the same exercises the same way side to side.
Yeah. Yeah, because we for sure are not robots,
We're not
at all. I
robots.
really like that idea too of, because a lot of times clients will ask me, "Well, like, how many should I do? Like, how many?" And just like you're saying of, like, just feel for it. Like, if one side gets exhausted faster, okay, cool, like, that's probably the weaker side. Maybe it needs, like, a few more repetitions, but
Yeah,
really, like, tuning into the differences and subtleties of what you need, even as it comes up. Because I know
yeah,
sometimes it can feel like whack-a-mole, where you're like, well, I'm working on this one thing. And like you're saying, now I have this other thing and I didn't know it was a thing. But it's all part of the process of becoming more integrated, is the word I want to say, of just like everything working together more
yeah,
harmoniously so that you can move more freely and without pain.
absolutely. And I think as well, just to sort of jump on that, like, how many do I do question, which is, people ask me that, and I'm always like, like shrug emoji, because it so much depends. And a lot of the time, what I'll say to people is like, the standard thing that you hear all the time is like 3 sets of 10
Right.
of something, but that's a completely invented, nonsensical thing. It's
Hmm.
just very easy to say and easy
Hmm.
for people to remember. But a lot of the time, what I'll emphasize for people is like, if this is a brand new thing, you've never been doing this movement, I would rather you do fewer and you do them really nicely and well, versus you do more of them and by the end it's a total mess, and it doesn't look like what we're trying to do in the first place. So
Hmm.
you don't always have to there's a story that I love, a friend of mine's dad who was told to do shoulder shrugs, and they told him to do 10. And so he interpreted that as like, if 10 is good, 100 must be better.
Oh
So
no.
this is an elderly gentleman. And so he was start doing like 100 shoulder shrugs a day. And then he was like, my neck hurts. And you're like, well, yeah,
Yeah. Oh my
100 is
god.
not automatically better than 10. Like, it's not how it goes.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, the whole like, how many do I do? I think it's a good way to turn that around. And instead of me prescribing, you must complete this number, instead, you want to have the person be like paying attention while they're doing it and see how it feels, see if they're fatiguing, see if they notice the quality of their movement is getting worse,
Mhm.
it's another way of, um, it's sort of putting the responsibility, but also giving ownership to the person, of like, no, you don't get just to zone out and go through this list of things and this is an opportunity for you actually to pay attention to
Yeah.
what's going on in your body and how things feel.
Yeah.
So I usually sort of set it up that way.
Yeah, you gotta pay attention. Another, well, like you were saying too, of just like form and like checking in with your posture and positioning. And once, ribs start to flare and lower back is all over the place and your head is hanging off like a melon on the vine, you've probably surpassed what you are strong enough to be able to do.
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome.
Um,
Well, so there's your first fitness myth. You do not have to do things identical on both sides, which has given my brain too such relief to not have to count. Like, I hate counting, because usually, I'm listening to a podcast or listening to music or like thinking about what I'm going to eat later. And so, something that might be helpful for those listening is, set a timer. So maybe it's how many great repetitions can I do in 45 seconds, and then maybe I do that a couple times if that feels appropriate, rather
yeah.
than sticking to this like sort of arbitrary 3 sets of 10.
Right. Right.
fun, fun. Now I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, let me go do some more hip stuff right now. Oh my gosh. Okay, so what about stretching before a workout? Because that's another question I get often is like, okay, but what warm up should I do before I work out? What are your thoughts on
Uh, so I mean, the stretching. We open the stretching box like it's gonna be like one of those movies where like someone opens a box and like 10,000 butterflies and like
that?
moths and bats and stuff. Like there's so much in the stretching box that we
Pandora's box.
really to unpack. Lots of feelings, lots of ideas, lots of opinions. Um, Generally speaking, you sort of want to think about it as the time before you're doing whatever your exercise is you're preparing your body for that exercise.
Hmm.
So let's say I'm getting ready to do a routine where I'm doing like squats with weights or something like that. I the ideal thing for my body is to start to increase blood flow to the muscles that are going to be working to start to wake them up a little bit, as it were, so that my body is ready to do the thing that's a bit harder than what the warm up is, right? So static stretching, like if I then just like lay down on my back and pull my knee into my chest, feels nice, but it doesn't necessarily do anything especially useful to prepare the body to go do the thing that you're about to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what does prepare the body is dynamic stretching. So movements that don't end,
Hmm.
so like, arm circles or twists through your torso or any of that kind of stuff. You can think about dynamic stretching almost like your sun salutation is kind of like a series of dynamic things. You're never really hanging out too long in any one position. So that's what's really useful for your body before you do something. The sort of static stretch, meaning I get into the shape and I hold it, is really useful afterwards,
Yeah.
is what I found. And, again, there's arguments. Nobody really knows, as far as I know, from what I've read, what actually even happens with stretching, what it actually is doing. It's very unclear research wise.
Hmm.
But what I see in people that I work with is that, for the most part, it's effective. It's something that they need to be doing after they do their working out, especially if the workout is something that is tending to make your muscles kind of tight.
Hmm.
Nobody, please don't at me about the word tight. But like the runners that I work with, the issues in their body are happening because running does tend to make everything tighter and tighter. It's not something that's like making your body more flexible.
Hmm.
So, working on that kind of static stretch is useful afterwards, especially if that's what your kind of workout is. Even for somebody who is, like me, hypermobile in a lot of places, nobody's hypermobile everywhere because otherwise your
Right.
whole body would fall apart. So there's things that I don't particularly work on because I don't have to, but there are other areas in my body that can get a little too aggressively, tight, and it is helpful to me to keep those parts of my body more mobile. So that's where I go in and do those static stretches on those parts, but not necessarily everywhere. And I also don't do it that much because I don't have to in my body because I
Yeah.
maintain that level of flexibility because I have this hypermobility that's specific to me. So that was a very long-winded way of saying before your workout, the kind of stuff you want to be doing is sort of flowing movement, thinking about warming up, thinking about getting blood flow, mimicking the shape of the movement that you're about to do, but maybe with no weight. So let's say you're doing just like air squats, and maybe you're not going as deep into it or whatever, but just starting to wake up your body in that moment, in that movement.
Yeah.
Then when you go to do your thing, that's when you add your kettlebell or your whatever.
Yeah.
That's the sort of general what I see as being the most effective way to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, because I do a lot of, and I've done an episode on that as well of just, like shoulder circles and, spine rotations, exactly what you're talking about of just moving your body and also using that as another opportunity to find like, where do I feel restriction? Where do things feel like
Totally.
asleep, so that,
Mhm.
okay, noted, let me do a little bit more prep work for that area so that I can then go into my workout without worrying about it.
Right.
But I think too that there's this idea that like you have to have like a 20-minute warm up or like something really, really like specific exactly to that workout. And, absolutely what you're saying of like do a movement that's specific to it. Um, But if you are moving all of your joints in all of the ways, it's
Yeah.
okay if you do the same type of warm up with like a little bit different,
Yeah.
difference in there every single time. Like you're not going to fall apart.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And depending on what the thing is that you're getting ready to do, but to your point, just taking all of your joints through their range of motion is a really good way to warm up your body.
Hmm.
So you'll do your wrists, elbows, shoulders, neck, thoracic, lumbar, all of that. You just like head, shoulders, knees, and toes.
Yeah, I say it every time. Yeah, I'm like, shoulders, knees, and toes.
But that's a really good way to do it.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
to your
And
point, yeah.
and thanks for the reminder too that even if we are flexible in other areas, that you can still have restrictions. For me, the one I'm working on right now is my quads, which I'm like,
Mm,
I don't even sit a lot. Like I'm standing at my workstation for a majority of the day, but oh my God,
yeah,
it's so
yeah,
why?
yeah.
All right, so I think a huge fitness myth that comes up, and I literally got a DM last week from someone who's like, "Hey, I'm having this pain here, and I went to the doctor, and they said I can never run again."
Mm,
So, what are your thoughts on if something hurts that I need to give that activity up forever?
yeah. That's and I want to say this with utmost respect to the doctors out there, but I tend to it is changing, but I do tend to see um, a less of a comprehension on what movement actually entails. And so it's easier to say, don't do the thing that hurts, or you should never do it again, versus my job, which is to actually unpack that, and look at the pieces of it and see what we can do. Right. So that's not that doctor's job. That's my job. Sometimes that is the case.
Right.
There are occasions when that is true. When this kind of movement, because of the variety of things that are showing up for you in particular, um, it's not the ideal thing for you to be doing for your body. And in that instance, then I've spent a lot of time trying to find replacements. Like, what is something that gives you that same endorphins? What is something that you enjoy equally but doesn't, trash your knees as much as running does, or something like that?
Hmm.
But the other side of it is, a lot of the time when people have injuries from an activity or sport, it happens because I'm so sorry, they're getting so loud outside.
Oh no, it's okay. It's not that loud on our
Okay,
end.
good, good, good. It happens because the whatever the thing that they're doing, you're progressing too fast.
Mm.
The number one, there's this really funny meme out there that's like a pie chart and about like how do you injure yourself, and the tiny slice is like I tripped and fell, and the rest of it is I felt fine. So
Yes.
I felt fine, so I kept going.
Yes.
Across the board, that's what I hear from people. Like,
All
I
the
was
time.
doing a run, and I know you and I said just 10 minutes, but I was feeling really good, so I did 20, and then my ankle started hurting, and I'm like, "Nyeh."
Yes,
So,
yes.
a big thing, how to progress appropriately is a really big thing. And the sort of short answer is it's slower than most people would like. But because we're in a hurry to get back to the thing we love, right? But
Yeah.
you know, I I had a patient one time when I first met him. He was in his mid 30s. Terrible knee pain. Couldn't even climb stairs. And I don't know how long it was. Maybe 9 months later, maybe a year later, he's running like a half marathon, no problem. But we started with you walk 1 minute, you run 1 minute, you walk 1 minute, repeat that a few times, and then you stop.
Right.
So it's the idea that like yes you can get to the mountaintop, but you're going to take small steps to get there. You're not running there, right? And
Right.
so a lot of the time when people have things that happen and they're like, oh well, I can't do this thing because I got hurt doing this thing, it's because of maybe they weren't, to your point, warming up enough before or stretching enough after. Maybe they were just trying to they were like, well, I used to run and I haven't done it in 10 years, so I put on my sneakers and I ran 5 miles. And like, oh, your body's just not ready. In particular, if you're above a certain age and your tissues are changing and your lifestyle has been different from when you were in college and running versus what you're doing now, You have to take all of these, it's the biopsychosocial, right? You have to take all of these other things into consideration. So, you know, again, there are some people for whom certain types of exercise, it's just not ideal. And it's not that I keep coming back to running because I do see this in particular with runners where they
Yeah.
are really obsessed with running, which is fine. And that's not a commentary on a good or a bad thing, but the runners that I know love running, and
Right.
it provides an endorphin. It provides something. It becomes part of their identity. And so the idea of, completely giving it up a lot of the time is not worth it to them versus, they'll put up with being injured or they'll run through pain or stuff like that. So, um, it just becomes about maybe taking a step back. If this is something where it's not going to, continue to injure you in some way to keep doing it, then it's a question of like, okay, how do we modify this? How do we maybe like take this all the way down to 10%, and you're
Right.
going to do 10% for a while and you're not going to like it because it's going to be a lot less than you want to do. But this is how we get you to where you're going to get safely without hurting yourself by actually strengthening you
Mhm.
appropriately and allowing your body to build the strength. It needs time. It takes
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
It's not an instant overnight. This thing that you and I were talking about that where I'm working on on that right side of my leg. Um, I started it in January, and we're now in March, and I'm still working on it. It's better, but it's not perfect by any means.
Right.
And I'm doing it slowly. The stuff that I do for it, I do twice a week. That's it, because it's a whole new thing that my body's trying to figure out how to do, and it would be uh, kind of diabolical for me to just like every day suddenly start doing this brand new thing that's incredibly hard to my body and just be like, deal with it. So,
You're
so
like, "And then my leg fell off. Oops."
right. I'm like, I have no idea why. I can't even understand. So, that's a big part of it, I think, is, if you hurt yourself doing something, if you care about it and you want to keep doing it, then we have to sort of sit down and figure out, okay, how do we do this intelligently, thoughtfully, in a way that allows your body to gain the strength that it needs to do it successfully. Um, or we figure out, okay, what is maybe swimming does it for you? Maybe like
Right.
you go on your Peloton and it's better, it's less impact on your knees, it's less painful. Maybe you just really like the being outdoors part, and maybe you discover that like, oh, actually, if I just go for a really long walk, I get a lot of the same stuff.
Mhm.
So that's my sort of long-winded answer.
Yeah. But no, I mean, that's such a great point too of like, not taking the movement at face value of like, well, it's just running, but like, what are the parts of it? What are the elements of it
Yeah.
that are the things that I'm missing? And how can we re engineer that to better fit where I'm at right now? And nothing in the body, well, okay, not nothing, very little in the body is like permanent forever, never going to change, because your cells are constantly turning over and your body is constantly turning over. There's always change and growth that can be made. But I think, exactly to your point about like running and something else, like my brother broke his knee, his leg, and had to have surgery, and he's got plates and stuff. Running just doesn't feel good anymore. And that's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, like, let's look for a new thing. And
Yeah.
so he's taken up bike riding, and he loves bike riding, and it gets him that same endorphin rush. So really just like taking a moment to think about like, what are the elements of this thing that I like, and how can I work collaboratively with my healthcare provider to figure out how to get back to that thing. Because
Yeah.
I think often too, like, you absolutely understand movement and are an active person, but there are so many, like, if you have a physical therapist or you have a doctor who is not a runner and is not an active person, they don't get it in the same way. And so you may also have to get your second or third opinion and find someone who is willing to work with you collaboratively to help you get back to where you want to be.
Yeah. And their perspective is different. A
Mhm.
doctor's not looking at it in terms of like, am I crushing this person's dreams, which is a lot
Right.
of the time what I'm thinking about. They're thinking about the integrity of the joint, and is this person going to need a knee replacement in 5 years? They're thinking about the mechanics a lot of the time and things like that. And I've also worked with people where they're like, I understand that this is the path that I'm going down. This thing means this much to me that I'm
Mhm.
willing to take the risk that the damage that I'm doing will require some sort of surgical intervention in the future. But then, at least that way, the person involved is getting to make a choice. They get
Right.
all the information and they get to make an informed decision about what they're doing with their body, as opposed to just being told, never do this thing again. Like when I first started having problems with my hip, I had a PT tell me, you should never do yoga again. And at the time, yoga was like the only thing I was doing. It was like the very beginning of my like love affair with yoga.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know very much because this has been going on for a while now, but I didn't really know enough to debate her on it. This was before I was even a yoga teacher, let alone a physical therapist. So I was just sort of like, miserable, but I guess okay. And then it didn't. My hip still felt terrible. So I was like, well,
Right.
forget it. This person, they just told me to stop doing the thing. They didn't give me other alternatives that might sort of fill the space. So I just went back to yoga because I was like, it didn't make it any better to stop doing it. So I love this thing. I want to keep doing this thing that I love,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and sometimes too, I think it's the thought of, oh, if you just stop doing this thing, everything will be fine, without addressing the underlying like stuff that's going on and the dysfunction that is contributing to it anyways. Like
Right.
your hip, it wasn't just the yoga was messing it up.
No.
It was exposing, right, what was going on.
Exactly.
I when it comes to like training too, I'm always thinking of like, okay, would you take your grandmother to hike Everest, just like out of the nursing home into Everest? No. And yet, I mean, I even did this weekend. I was like, I haven't been running like at all. And I'm on a beach, but like, of course I could run barefoot. This will be fine. Totally fine. And it was fine for like, I think I ran like 4 minutes and I was like, that's good. Check. Done. Done. But sometimes I find it fun to like kind of push the limits a little bit because then it exposes your weaknesses.
Yeah.
Which then I had a calf muscle that was like, what is wrong with you? You are crazy. I'm like, all right, now I know I got to work there.
Right.
But then re-engineering it. Okay, if I want to be able to run, let me start with like those intervals that you were talking about,
Right.
or that same movement, that same action, but not with weight or not standing up. Maybe I'm practicing the movement on my back or with props, like
Right.
whatever, just to get really creative with the movement.
Yeah.
To have it fit you where you're at now, and then you can get to where you want to go.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the things I sort of think about a lot in terms of bodies, and this is maybe a little nerdy, sort of like more for the teachers out there, is like sort of a simple way to break it down in your head is global versus local. Global being the whole you, which is the person running, local being your knee, your hip, your whatever. And sometimes you have to go in and do, like, everyone loves functional movements, right? Everyone loves exercises that are, quote unquote functional. Sometimes you have to go in and do like some not particularly functional looking thing, but something that really addresses that local issue. Like maybe you have to do, like I do, quad sets, like, knee extension exercises with an ankle weight. It doesn't look like anything I do in real life, but that's what my leg needs. And that's going to then allow me to do the global. So being able to go back and for like look big picture and then zoom in on like, okay, but where, like for you with your calf, where is the piece that's actually turning out to be the little like chink in the armor? How do I manage that? So then when I step back as a whole, I am, to your point, integrated and everything's working as it should. Because that one little piece is going to set off a storm of other problems potentially down the line, right? It's not just going to sit there on its own and be annoyed. It's being annoyed is going to make like your back on the other side then maybe do some kind of hinky thing. And then your one shoulder is going to go up because your neck isn't loving it. You know what I mean? No, it'll start this kind of cascade of stuff. So being able to go in and kind of pinpoint, okay, why was it that after 4 minutes I needed to stop running? It was my calf. Okay, let me go in and address the calf, see what's going on here. And then, I retest or whatever, go back to the run and see, okay, yeah, actually, now that I've spent some time doing that, I can do 6 minutes. Great. Let me stay there, and then from there.
Yeah, that retesting, that's what that's perfect. Break it down, do what you need to do the super boring things, and then put it back together and test it, because that testing in itself will give you the information about where to go next, which is what being a body detective is all about.
Absolutely.
Being an integrated human. That's all we're trying to do, is just to be more human, and it's a lot of work. So much work. Okay, well, this has been super, super fascinating. And I know that there are like infinite amount of additional fitness myths that we are going to continue to tackle. So send us your fitness myths. You can hit me up on Instagram at Hala Formala. You can even send Sarah a DM. You are at Sarah Court DPT.
That's right.
Let us know what questions have been percolating. What lies have you been told about your body? I feel like something about the psoas we need to talk about.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, we
Oh
need.
yeah.
I will make a note for that for our next conversations. But thank you for hanging out and helping us to debunk these myths because there's so much nonsense and confusion out there
There
about what
really
to
is.
do with your body.
There really is. Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love this. Is this kind of I could do this all day.
Okay,
Um,
well, what are you doing at 2 o'clock? No.